Bullies yanked off her headscarf. Her roundhouse left them moaning. The first rays of dawn filtered through the sheer curtains of Zara Khalil's bedroom window, casting gentle patterns of light across the pale yellow walls, adorned with calligraphy art and family photographs. At 17 years old, Zara had developed a morning routine that helped center her before facing another day at Roosevelt High School. She knelt on her prayer rug, whispering the familiar Arabic words that brought her peace, her forehead touching the soft fabric as she completed her morning prayers. Rising gracefully, she moved to her dresser mirror and began the careful process of wrapping her navy blue headscarf. The hijab was made of a soft, breathable cotton blend that her aunt had brought back from a trip to Turkey, decorated with delicate silver embroidery along the edges. As she folded and pinned the fabric with practiced movements, Zara caught sight of her reflection, olive skin that spoke of her Palestinian heritage, dark brown eyes that held depths of intelligence and quiet strength, and high cheekbones that gave her face an elegant, almost regal quality. Her bedroom reflected the careful balance she maintained between her cultural identity and American teenage life. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with everything from classic literature to contemporary young adult novels. Islamic texts sitting comfortably beside works by Shakespeare and Maya Angelou. A desk in the corner held her laptop, surrounded by neat stacks of homework and college application materials. Photos of family gatherings, mosque events, and school academic achievements created a collage of her life on a bulletin board above her bed. Downstairs, the kitchen buzzed with the familiar morning energy of the Khalil household. Her mother, Amira, stood at the stove preparing eggs and toast, her own hijab a soft grey that complemented her warm smile. At 43, Amira Khalil retained the quiet beauty that had first caught her husband's attention 20 years ago, though her eyes now held the wisdom and slight weariness that came with raising 3 children in a country that didn't always welcome them with open arms. "Good morning, Habibti," Amira said, using the Arabic term of endearment as she placed a plate before her daughter. "You were up late studying again. I saw your light on past midnight." Zara settled into her chair at the small breakfast table, adjusting her backpack beside her feet. The bag was a sturdy black JanSport that had served her well through 3 years of high school, now showing slight wear at the corners, but still faithfully carrying the weight of her academic ambitions. "I had to finish my calculus homework and review for the AP History exam. Mrs. Patterson said this test could make or break our preparation for the AP exam in May." Her younger brother, Omar, 15 and still growing into his lanky frame, bounded down the stairs with the energy that only teenage boys seem to possess. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles despite his mother's earlier attempts to tame it, and his Roosevelt High School t-shirt was already wrinkled, though he'd only put it on 10 minutes ago. "Zara, can you give me a ride today?" Omar asked, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl and biting into it with a loud crunch. "Mom's car is in the shop and Dad already left for the clinic. Their father, Dr. Hassan Khalil, ran a small family practice on the other side of town, serving a diverse community that included many immigrant families who appreciated having a doctor who understood their cultural needs and spoke their language." He left the house before sunrise most mornings, arriving at his clinic early to review patient files and prepare for a day of healing and helping others. "Of course," Zara replied, finishing her eggs and gathering her things. "But we need to leave in 5 minutes, or I'll be late for my first period." The drive to Roosevelt High School took 15 minutes through the tree-lined streets of Millbrook, a suburb that prided itself on its manicured lawns, white picket fences, and general air of prosperity. The Khalil family had moved here when Zara was in 8th grade, drawn by the excellent school district and the promise of opportunities for their children. Dr. Khalil had saved for years to afford a house in this neighborhood, believing that education was the key to his children's success in America. Roosevelt High School was an imposing structure of red brick and limestone, built in the 1960s when the community was expanding rapidly. The building sprawled across several acres, with wings dedicated to different academic departments, a large gymnasium that hosted basketball games and wrestling matches, and a football field where the Roosevelt Eagles played to crowds of enthusiastic parents and students every Friday night in the fall. As Zara pulled her mother's silver Honda Civic into the student parking lot, she observed the familiar social dynamics already playing out across the asphalt. The popular kids clustered around expensive SUVs and sports cars, their laughter carrying across the morning air as they discussed weekend parties and upcoming social events. The athletes moved with the confidence that came from being celebrated for their physical prowess, their Letterman jackets marking them as members of Roosevelt's elite social hierarchy. Zara parked in a spot near the back of the lot, away from the main thoroughfares where the popular students held court. She had learned over her 3 years at Roosevelt that visibility often meant vulnerability, and she preferred to move through the school environment with as little attention as possible. At 5 feet 3 inches, with a slight but athletic build, she had mastered the art of blending into crowds and avoiding the notice of those who might view her as different or threatening. What none of her classmates knew was that beneath her modest, long-sleeved shirts and loose-fitting jeans lay muscles honed by years of rigorous training. Since the age of 7, Zara had been studying Taekwondo at her uncle's dojang in the neighboring town of Riverside. Her uncle, Khalil Mansour, was a former Olympic competitor who had represented Jordan in the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, earning a bronze medal in the heavyweight division. When the family had immigrated to the United States, he had opened his own martial arts school, determined to pass on not just the physical techniques of Taekwondo, but also its philosophical foundations of discipline, respect, and self-control. 3 times a week, Zara made the 20-minute drive to Uncle Khalil's dojang, where she had progressed from a nervous 7-year-old struggling to remember basic stances to a confident second-degree black belt, capable of breaking boards with her bare hands and sparring with opponents twice her size. The training had given her more than physical skills. It had instilled in her a quiet confidence and an understanding of when to fight and when to walk away. But her parents had made her promise early on to never use her martial arts skills unless absolutely necessary. Violence should always be the last resort, her father had told her repeatedly. We are guests in this country, and we must conduct ourselves with dignity and honor. Let others throw the first stone, but do not give them reason to throw it. Zara had honored that promise for 3 years at Roosevelt, even as she faced increasingly hostile behavior from certain classmates who seemed to view her hijab as a personal affront to their vision of American teenage life. She had endured whispered slurs in the hallways, accidental bumps and shoves, and the kind of social isolation that comes when you're marked as different in a community that values conformity above almost everything else. The first bell rang as she reached the main entrance, joining the stream of students flowing through the heavy glass doors into the fluorescent-lit hallways. Roosevelt's interior reflected the institutional architecture of its era, long corridors lined with metal lockers painted in the school colors of blue and gold, bulletin boards covered with announcements for club meetings and upcoming events, and classroom doors marked with numbers and teacher nameplates. Zara's locker was located in the junior hallway, a strategic position that allowed her to avoid some of the more problematic areas of the school. She spun the combination with practiced ease, 17, 23, 8, numbers that corresponded to her birthday and had become as automatic as breathing after 3 years of repetition. Inside, she kept her textbooks organized by subject, a small mirror for adjusting her hijab, and a photo of her family taken last summer during their annual camping trip to Lake George. Well, look who decided to show up today," came a voice that made Zara's shoulders tense involuntarily. her muscles responding to a threat before her mind had fully processed the words. Bryce Morrison stepped into view with the casual arrogance that seemed to be his natural state. At 18 years old and standing 6 feet tall, Bryce commanded attention wherever he went. His sandy blonde hair was styled with expensive product into the kind of casually perfect look that required significant effort to achieve. And his Roosevelt Eagles Letterman jacket showcased his position as a varsity wrestler. The jacket itself was a source of pride and power, navy blue wool with gold leather sleeves, decorated with pins marking his various achievements and the respect of his peers. Bryce came from one of Millbrook's oldest and wealthiest families. His father owned a successful construction company that had built half the developments in the area, and his mother served on the school board and chaired the annual fundraising gala. This background had given Bryce a sense of entitlement that permeated every aspect of his personality, from his assumption that teachers would give him preferential treatment to his belief that his opinions carried more weight than those of students from less prominent families. Behind him stood his usual crew, a carefully curated group of followers who basked in the reflected glory of his social status. Kent Dawson was built like a linebacker because that's exactly what he was. 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and attitude, with hands the size of dinner plates and a permanent scowl that suggested he viewed most interactions as potential conflicts. His dark hair was cut short in a military style that emphasized the thick cords of muscle in his neck, and his eyes held the kind of mean intelligence that enjoyed finding weaknesses in others. Kent's family lived in one of the newer subdivisions on the outskirts of Millbrook, a middle-class development that was nice enough but lacked the generational wealth and social connections that defined the true elite. This position on the social ladder, comfortable but not quite at the top, had bred in Kent a particular kind of resentment toward anyone who threatened his precarious position in the hierarchy. Ashley Reeves completed the trio, and in many ways, she was the most dangerous of the three. Where Bryce relied on physical intimidation and Kent used brute force, Ashley wielded words like surgical instruments, capable of inflicting wounds that cut deeper than any physical blow. At 17, she had already perfected the art of social manipulation that would serve her well in whatever ruthless corporate environment she eventually entered. Ashley's appearance was carefully crafted to project effortless perfection. Honey blonde hair that fell in perfectly styled waves, makeup applied with professional skill to enhance her naturally pretty features, and clothing that managed to be both expensive and tasteful while still pushing the boundaries of the school dress code. Her family had moved to Millbrook 3 years ago when her father's tech company had been acquired by a larger corporation, making them nouveau riche in a community that still valued old money and established connections. "Morning, towelhead," Ashley said, with the kind of fake sweetness that made Zara's skin crawl. She examined her perfectly manicured nails as she spoke, French tips that probably cost more than Zara's family spent on groceries in a week. "Love what you've done with your hair. Oh wait, we can't see it under that rag." The slur hit Zara like a physical blow, but she had learned over the years to absorb such attacks without showing a reaction. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of the anger building in her chest, but she continued organizing her books with steady hands. She had discovered that engaging with their provocations only encouraged them, feeding their need for drama and conflict like fuel on a fire. Around them, other students moved through the hallway with the purposeful energy of teenagers trying to reach their first period classes before the late bell. Some glanced over at the developing confrontation with curiosity or concern, but most looked away quickly, unwilling to risk becoming targets themselves. The unspoken rule at Roosevelt was clear: don't get involved in other people's problems, especially when those problems involved Bryce Morrison and his crew. "Hey, "I'm talking to you," Bryce said, stepping closer until his shadow fell across her open locker. Up close, Zara could smell his expensive cologne, mixed with the protein powder he consumed religiously as part of his wrestling training regimen. His voice carried the entitled tone of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted, the assumption that others would naturally defer to his wishes. "It's rude not to answer when someone's being friendly," he continued, leaning against the locker next to hers with casual ownership of the space. The metal door clanged softly under his weight, a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly tense atmosphere. "I heard you," Zara replied quietly, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. She pulled out her calculus textbook, a thick volume filled with equations and theorems that represented hours of study and dedication. "I just have nothing to say." This was her standard strategy. Acknowledge their presence without engaging in their games. Demonstrate that she wasn't afraid while avoiding any behavior that could be construed as aggressive or confrontational. It was a delicate balance, one that required her to swallow her pride and endure their insults while projecting enough quiet strength to avoid being seen as an easy victim. Kent laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal lockers like the bark of a predatory animal. "She thinks she's too good for us, Bryce. Maybe we need to teach her some manners." The hallway had grown quieter as other students sensed the tension and either hurried past or slowed their pace to observe from a safe distance. Zara could feel the weight of their stares, some sympathetic but most simply curious about the unfolding drama. She recognized the familiar pattern. Everyone knew what was happening, but no one wanted to get involved and risk becoming the next target. The social dynamics at Roosevelt High School were as rigid and unforgiving as any caste system. At the top were the athletes and the children of wealthy families, protected by their status and their connections to the adult power structure. Below them were the various cliques and subgroups, each defending their small piece of territory in the complex ecosystem of teenage society. At the bottom were the outcasts and the different students who didn't fit the accepted molds, who came from the wrong families, or believed the wrong things, or simply looked different enough to be marked as other. Zara had been placed in that bottom category from her first day at Roosevelt, marked by her hijab and her family's foreign origins as someone who didn't belong. No amount of academic achievement or good behavior could change that fundamental classification in the minds of students like Bryce, Kent, and Ashley. "You know what your problem is?" Bryce leaned against the locker next to hers, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that only she could hear. His breath was warm against her ear as he invaded her personal space with the casual cruelty of someone who had never been told no. "You act like you don't belong here, like you're better than the rest of us." "I never said that," Zara replied, closing her locker with deliberate care and shouldering her bag. The weight of her textbooks was familiar and comforting, a reminder of her academic goals and the future she was working toward. She tried to walk away, but Kent moved to block her path, his bulk intimidating in the narrow hallway. At 6 feet 2 inches and over 200 pounds of muscle, Kent's physical presence was designed to intimidate. He had played football since middle school, building his identity around his ability to physically dominate other people. His Letterman jacket displayed patches for wrestling as well as football, marking him as one of the school's premier athletes and giving him social protection that was almost as valuable as his physical strength. "Where you going, terrorist?" he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, using the slur with casual cruelty that spoke of years of practice. The word hung in the air like a poison cloud, and Zara saw several nearby students flinch at the raw hatred in his voice. The accusation hit Zara like a physical blow, but she forced her face to remain impassive. She had heard worse over the years, much worse, but it never stopped stinging. The assumption that her faith and her family's heritage somehow made her a threat to America was as ignorant as it was hurtful. But arguing with people like Kent was like trying to reason with a brick wall. Around them, she could see other students glancing over with a mixture of curiosity, discomfort, and voyeuristic fascination. Some looked genuinely troubled by what they were witnessing, but none of them moved to intervene or offer support. The culture at Roosevelt had trained them all to be bystanders, to watch and record, but never to risk their own social standing by standing up for someone else. "Move, please," Zara said firmly, meeting Kent's gaze directly for the first time. She drew on the quiet confidence that years of martial arts training had instilled in her, projecting calm strength even as her heart raced with adrenaline. "Oh, she's got some fire in her," Ashley laughed, the sound sharp and cutting like breaking glass. I wondered if there was actually a person under all that fabric. The late bell rang, its electronic chime echoing through the hallways as students hurried to their first period classes. Zara saw her opportunity and stepped around Kent before he could react, walking quickly toward her AP history classroom. Her first class of the day was with Mrs. Patterson, a teacher who actually seemed to care about her students' success and who had encouraged Zara to take advanced placement courses despite the additional workload. Behind her, she heard Bryce call out in a voice loud enough for half the hallway to hear, "This isn't over, raghead. We'll see you later." The threat followed her down the corridor like a dark cloud, but Zara forced herself to walk with steady steps toward her classroom. She had survived encounters like this before, and she would survive whatever came next. The key was to remain calm, avoid escalation, and trust that her academic performance would eventually create opportunities to escape this toxic environment. Mrs. Patterson's classroom was a haven of intellectual curiosity in the often anti-intellectual atmosphere of Roosevelt High School. The walls were covered with historical timelines, maps of different eras, and quotes from famous figures throughout history. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with primary sources and historical analyses that went far beyond the standard textbook curriculum. "Good morning, Zara," Mrs. Patterson said as she entered the classroom. "I hope you're ready for today's discussion on the civil rights movement. I'm particularly interested in your perspective on the strategies of nonviolent resistance." Zara took her seat in the second row, surrounded by other students who had chosen to challenge themselves with advanced coursework. Here, at least, she was valued for her mind rather than judged for her appearance. Her essays earned praise, her questions sparked interesting discussions, and her teachers saw her as a promising student rather than a potential threat. But even in her favorite class, Zara found it difficult to focus on the lesson. Bryce's threat echoed in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different somehow. There had been something in his voice, a finality that suggested he was tired of their usual games and ready to escalate to something more serious. The rest of the morning passed without incident, but Zara could feel the weight of impending confrontation. She navigated the hallways between classes with heightened awareness, noting the positions of exits and avoiding the areas where Bryce and his crew were most likely to congregate. Her lunch period would be the most dangerous time. Fewer adults around and more opportunities for accidents to happen away from watchful eyes. The cafeteria at Roosevelt High School was a vast space that could accommodate nearly 500 students during the 3 lunch periods. Long tables arranged in rows created natural gathering places for different social groups, with the popular kids claiming the prime real estate near the windows, while the less socially connected students found spots along the walls or in the corners. Zara grabbed a turkey sandwich and apple from the lunch line, paying with the school ID card that also tracked her meal purchases. The food was typical institutional fare, edible but unremarkable, designed more for efficiency than flavor. She scanned the room, looking for a quiet corner where she could eat in peace and perhaps get some studying done during the brief respite. That's when she spotted him. Dylan Foster, sitting alone at a table near the windows with a thick fantasy novel propped open beside his lunch tray. Dylan was new to Roosevelt, having transferred in at the beginning of the semester when his father's job had relocated the family from Portland, Oregon. At 17, he was tall and lean, with the kind of naturally athletic build that came from years of hiking and outdoor activities rather than organized sports. His curly brown hair fell across his green eyes as he read, and he had the kind of gentle smile that made Zara's heart skip when he looked her way in their shared English class. Unlike most of the other students at Roosevelt, Dylan had never stared at her hijab with curiosity or suspicion, never made comments about her appearance or her family's background. In fact, he had defended her once when another student made a crude joke about flying carpets during a discussion of transportation methods in their American literature class. "That's not funny," Dylan had said firmly, his voice cutting through the snickers of his classmates. "It's just ignorant." The comment had earned him some hostile looks from other students, but he hadn't seemed to care. Zara had been grateful for his intervention, though she hadn't found the courage to thank him directly. Making friends at Roosevelt was a delicate process that required careful navigation of social hierarchies and unspoken rules. Zara was debating whether to approach his table when disaster struck, with the sudden randomness that marked so many traumatic events. As she walked past a group of junior boys clustered around one of the center tables, one of them accidentally stuck out his foot. The movement was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but perfectly timed to catch her ankle as she passed. Zara went down hard, her lunch tray flying through the air in a perfect arc before crashing to the white tile floor with a sound like breaking thunder. Turkey and lettuce scattered across the ground, her apple rolled under a nearby table, and the plastic cup of water she'd been carrying exploded in a shower of ice and liquid that soaked into her jeans. The cafeteria erupted in laughter and jeers as she struggled to get up, the sound seeming to come from every direction at once. 500 students turned to stare at the girl on the floor, some genuinely concerned, but most simply entertained by the unexpected break in their routine. Cell phones appeared as if by magic, capturing her humiliation for social media posts that would follow her for the rest of her high school career. "Oops," said Jake Williams, the boy who had tripped her. He was a junior with an unfortunate combination of acne and attitude, the kind of student who compensated for his own insecurities by picking on others. "Sorry about that. Guess you should watch where you're going." Jake's comment sparked fresh laughter from his table, and Zara could feel her face burning with embarrassment as she knelt on the cold tile floor. Her hijab had shifted in the fall, and she quickly adjusted it while fighting back tears of humiliation. The scattered remains of her lunch seemed to mock her as she tried to gather them up, aware that hundreds of eyes were watching her every movement. Students stepped around her like she was an obstacle rather than a person, some making comments just loud enough for her to hear. "Maybe she needs glasses," one girl suggested with fake concern. "Or maybe she's just clumsy," another added with a cruel laugh. The casual cruelty was almost worse than deliberate malice, the way they treated her suffering as entertainment rather than tragedy. Then a pair of worn sneakers appeared in her field of vision, and a gentle hand helped her to her feet. Dylan Foster stood beside her, his face flushed with anger as he glared at Jake and his friends. Up close, Zara could see that his green eyes held flecks of gold, and his jaw was set with the kind of righteous indignation that came from witnessing genuine injustice. "That was a real class act, Williams," Dylan said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet section of the cafeteria. "You must be really proud of yourself." Jake's smirk faltered slightly under Dylan's withering stare, but he recovered quickly. "Hey, it was an accident," he protested, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Not my fault she can't walk in a straight line." Dylan helped Zara gather her scattered belongings, his movements efficient and purposeful as he collected her textbooks and personal items. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice full of genuine concern that was so different from the mockery surrounding them. "I'm fine," Zara replied, though her voice shook slightly with suppressed emotion. "Thank you for helping me." Dylan walked with her to get cleaning supplies from the custodial station, maintaining a protective presence that discouraged further harassment from other students. As they worked together to clean up the spilled food and water, he continued to project quiet strength that seemed to create a bubble of safety around them. "Don't let them get to you," Dylan said as they mopped up the last of the mess. "They're just insecure bullies who pick on people because they hate themselves." For the first time all day, Zara smiled genuinely. The expression transformed her face, revealing the natural beauty that her defensive posture usually kept hidden. "You don't have to be nice to me, you know. It might make you a target too." Dylan straightened up and looked her directly in the eyes, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I'd rather be a target for doing the right thing than safe for doing nothing." The simple statement carried a weight that surprised them both. In a school where most students carefully calculated the social costs of every action, Dylan's willingness to stand up for someone he barely knew was revolutionary. Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the rare experience of being seen as a person worth defending. From that day forward, their friendship grew with the careful deliberation of two people who understood the value of genuine connection. Dylan made a point of sitting with Zara at lunch, their conversations ranging from their shared love of literature to their dreams for college and beyond. He was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions about her Palestinian heritage and her family's journey to America, showing genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. In return, Zara shared stories about her life that she had never told to another student at Roosevelt. She described the beauty of her grandmother's village in the West Bank, the way her family gathered for holidays that blended American traditions with Middle Eastern customs, and her dreams of becoming a lawyer who could help other immigrant families navigate the complex legal system. Dylan told her about his life in Oregon, where his family had lived on 5 acres of forest land, and he had spent his childhood climbing trees and exploring mountain trails. His father worked as an environmental engineer, and his mother was a high school English teacher who had instilled in him a love of books and social justice. The move to Millbrook had been difficult for him, trading the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest for the manicured suburbs of upstate New York. Their friendship provided both of them with something they had been missing at Roosevelt: genuine acceptance and intellectual companionship. They discovered shared interests in classic literature, environmental conservation, and social justice causes. During lunch periods, they would discuss everything from the latest books they were reading to their concerns about climate change and political developments around the world. For the first time in her 3 years at Roosevelt, Zara began to look forward to school. She found herself checking her appearance more carefully in the morning, choosing hijabs in colors that she thought Dylan might find attractive. Their friendship was entirely platonic, but she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement she felt when she saw him waiting for her by her locker or saving her a seat in the cafeteria. But their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed by Bryce Morrison and his crew. Bryce had been watching the development of their friendship with increasing irritation. In his mind, Roosevelt High School operated according to certain natural laws that he had helped establish and maintain. Popular students associated with other popular students. Athletes stayed within their own circles, and outsiders knew their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy. Zara's friendship with Dylan represented a violation of these unspoken rules that Bryce found personally offensive. Dylan was new enough to potentially earn acceptance in the popular crowd, especially given his good looks and evident intelligence. But instead of seeking approval from the established social leaders, he was choosing to associate with someone who had been marked as undesirable. The situation became even more galling when Bryce learned that Dylan had been invited to try out for the track team. The boy's lean build and obvious athleticism had caught the attention of Coach Martinez, who was always looking for new talent to strengthen Roosevelt's competitive position. If Dylan joined the team and proved successful, it would give him additional status that might make it even harder to separate him from his inappropriate friendship. Ashley Reeves had her own reasons for targeting the developing relationship. She had noticed Dylan from his first day at Roosevelt and had been planning her own campaign to recruit him into her social circle. In her experience, new students were often grateful for guidance from established popular students, and she had anticipated that Dylan would be eager to gain acceptance from the right people. Instead, he seemed completely uninterested in the social climbing that drove most of Roosevelt's student body. He had politely declined invitations to parties thrown by popular students, showing no interest in the activities that usually attracted teenage boys. Even worse, he seemed genuinely happy spending his time with a girl who wore a headscarf and came from a family that Ashley's parents would probably describe as not our kind of people. Kent Dawson's motivations were simpler, but no less dangerous. He viewed Dylan's refusal to acknowledge the established social hierarchy as a personal challenge to his authority. In Kent's world, strength was respected and weakness was punished, and anyone who failed to show proper deference to the school's alpha males needed to be taught their place. The three of them began planning their campaign to separate Dylan from Zara and restore the proper social order at Roosevelt High School. The harassment began subtly, as it often did when bullies wanted to maintain plausible deniability. Zara started finding offensive notes slipped through the vents of her locker, printed on plain white paper in anonymous fonts that could have come from any computer. The messages began with relatively mild insults. "Go back where you came from, and nobody wants you here," but quickly escalated to more graphic and threatening language. "We know where you live," read one note that made her hands shake as she crumpled it up and threw it away. "Tell your terrorist family to watch their backs." Someone spray-painted "Go Home" across the windshield of her mother's Honda Civic, using bright red paint that required professional cleaning to remove completely. The message was discovered on a Monday morning, meaning it had been done over the weekend when the school parking lot was empty, and there were no witnesses to identify the perpetrators. The accidental bumps and shoves in the hallways increased in frequency and intensity. Zara would be walking to class when a shoulder would slam into hers, sending her stumbling into the wall or causing her to drop her books. The perpetrators would always offer fake apologies. "Sorry, didn't see you there," or "My bad, you're so short." But the pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. During lunch periods, students at nearby tables would make comments just loud enough for her to hear. They would discuss fake news stories about terrorist attacks, wonder aloud about the loyalty of Muslim Americans, or make crude jokes about Middle Eastern stereotypes. The conversations were technically not directed at her, making them difficult to report to teachers or administrators, but the intent was unmistakable. Dylan's presence provided some protection, but he couldn't be with her every moment of the school day. When he was in a different wing of the building for his advanced chemistry class, Zara found herself particularly vulnerable to harassment. Students would wait until she was alone to make their comments or stage their accidents, timing their actions for maximum impact and minimum adult supervision. The psychological toll was exhausting. Zara found herself constantly vigilant, scanning every hallway for potential threats and analyzing every interaction for hidden malice. Sleep became difficult as her mind replayed the day's encounters and anticipated tomorrow's challenges. Her grades, which had always been excellent, began to slip slightly as the stress affected her ability to concentrate on her studies. Her parents noticed the changes but attributed them to the normal pressures of senior year and college applications. Zara had always been reluctant to worry them with school problems, knowing that they carried their own burdens as immigrants trying to build successful lives in a sometimes hostile environment. Her father worked long hours at his clinic, often seeing patients who couldn't afford to pay full price for medical care, while her mother volunteered at the mosque and helped other immigrant families navigate American bureaucracy. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon in late March, when the early spring sunshine had finally begun to melt the last remnants of winter snow. Zara had stayed after school to work on a group project in the library with Dylan and two other classmates from their AP English class. The project focused on contemporary immigration narratives, and their group had chosen to examine the experiences of refugees from different conflicts around the world. The library at Roosevelt High School was one of Zara's favorite places in the building, a quiet sanctuary filled with books and the kind of respectful atmosphere that encouraged learning rather than social posturing. Mrs. Chen, the head librarian, maintained strict rules about noise levels and behavior that created a space where students could actually focus on their academic work. Their group had been working for 2 hours, researching statistics on refugee resettlement and analyzing first-hand accounts of the immigration experience. Dylan had proven to be an excellent research partner, his careful attention to detail and genuine empathy for their subjects making him a valuable contributor to the project. The other 2 students, Sarah Kim and Michael Rodriguez, were also serious about their academics, creating a collaborative environment that reminded Zara why she loved learning. By the time they finished their work session, the library was nearly empty and most of the teachers had gone home for the weekend. The hallways echoed with the hollow sound that characterized school buildings after hours, when the usual chaos of teenage energy had been replaced by an almost eerie quiet. Zara gathered her materials and said goodbye to her group members, looking forward to a weekend of family time and additional research for their project. She walked to her car in the student parking lot, enjoying the warm afternoon sunshine and the sense of academic accomplishment that came from productive collaboration. She was unlocking her car door when she heard footsteps behind her, multiple sets moving with the kind of purposeful coordination that immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. The parking lot was mostly empty at this hour, with only a few scattered vehicles belonging to students who had stayed for after-school activities or teachers who were working late. "Hey, raghead!" Bryce's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade carrying clearly across the asphalt. "We need to have a conversation." Zara turned to see Bryce, Kent and Ashley approaching from different directions, their positions calculated to box her in between the rows of parked cars. They moved with the kind of predatory coordination that spoke of careful planning, and she realized that they had been waiting for exactly this opportunity, when she would be alone and vulnerable, away from witnesses and adult supervision. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to remain calm. There were still a few students and teachers around the building. Surely they wouldn't do anything too extreme with potential witnesses nearby. She continued toward her car, hoping to reach the safety of the locked vehicle before they could close the distance. "I don't have anything to say to you," Zara replied, fumbling for her car keys with hands that trembled slightly with adrenaline. "Oh, but we have something to say to you," Ashley said, with a vicious smile that transformed her pretty features into something cruel and predatory. "See, we've been watching you and your little boyfriend getting all cozy. It's really quite disgusting." Ashley's voice carried the kind of casual malice that came from years of using words as weapons. She had perfected the art of delivering devastating insults with the same tone she might use to comment on the weather, making her attacks all the more unsettling. "Dylan's just a friend," Zara said, finally finding her keys, but realizing that Bryce had positioned himself between her and the driver's side door. "Sure he is," Kent laughed, a sound like grinding metal that echoed off the nearby cars. "Wonder what he sees in you. Maybe he's got a thing for freaks." Kent's physical presence was intimidating, even at a distance, but up close, he seemed to fill the entire space around them. His Letterman jacket strained across shoulders that had been built through years of weightlifting and football training, and his hands were the size of dinner plates. The casual way he flexed his fingers suggested he was looking forward to the possibility of physical confrontation. Bryce stepped closer, his blue eyes cold and calculating as he studied her face for signs of fear. "Here's the thing, Zara. This is our school, and we don't like outsiders coming in and thinking they can just take whatever they want. First, you think you can walk around here like you own the place, and now you're corrupting one of our own." "Dylan can be friends with whoever he wants," Zara replied, meeting Bryce's gaze with as much courage as she could muster. "It's none of your business. Everything that happens at this school is my business," Bryce snarled, his mask of civilized behavior finally slipping to reveal the entitled rage beneath. "And I think it's time you learned your place." He nodded to Kent, who stepped forward and grabbed Zara's backpack, yanking it off her shoulders with enough force to nearly knock her off balance. The bag hit the asphalt with a dull thud, and Kent immediately upended it, dumping its contents across the parking lot with obvious satisfaction. Books, papers, and personal items scattered across the ground like casualties of war. Her calculus textbook fell open to pages covered with her careful handwriting. Homework assignments fluttered in the afternoon breeze, and pens and pencils rolled under nearby cars. The violation felt almost as personal as if they had ransacked her bedroom. These academic materials that represented hours of study and intellectual growth now treated like garbage. "Oops," Kent said mockingly, echoing Jake Williams' fake apology from the cafeteria incident weeks before. "Looks like you dropped something." As Zara knelt to gather her belongings, her hands shaking with rage and humiliation, Ashley noticed something that made her eyes light up with malicious glee. Among the scattered items was a small framed photograph that Zara kept in her backpack as a reminder of home and family. A picture taken at her cousin's wedding the previous summer, showing 3 generations of the Khalil family dressed in traditional Palestinian clothing. The photograph was particularly precious because it included her grandmother and grandfather, both of whom had passed away in the months following the wedding. It was one of the last pictures taken of the entire extended family together, capturing a moment of joy and cultural pride that had sustained Zara through many difficult days at Roosevelt. "Oh my God, look at this!" Ashley squealed with delight, holding up the photograph like a trophy. "Is this your whole terrorist family? They're all wearing those ridiculous outfits." The cruel laughter that followed felt like physical blows, but what happened next crossed every line that Zara had drawn for herself. Ashley, still holding the family photograph, made a show of examining it closely before deliberately dropping it face down on the asphalt and grinding it under her heel. The sound of breaking glass seemed to echo across the entire parking lot as Ashley twisted her foot, destroying not just the frame, but the irreplaceable image itself. She smiled with satisfaction as she lifted her shoe to reveal the torn and dirty remains of the photograph, pieces of broken glass mixed with fragments of the picture that had captured one of Zara's most cherished memories. "Whoops," Ashley said with fake innocence, her voice dripping with cruelty. "Clumsy me." The destruction of the family photograph was more than vandalism. It was a deliberate attack on everything Zara held dear. The image had been a connection to her heritage, her family, and the grandparents who had loved her unconditionally. Watching Ashley destroy it with such casual malice was like watching someone burn down her childhood home. Something shifted deep inside Zara's chest. a primal response that had nothing to do with her careful self-control and everything to do with the basic human need to defend what mattered most. For 3 years, she had endured their harassment with patience and dignity, believing that rising above their cruelty was the noble path. But there were some lines that could not be crossed without consequences. Before she could fully process her emotions or plan her response, she heard running footsteps approaching across the asphalt. Dylan appeared around the corner of the building, having noticed the confrontation from the library windows where he had been gathering his own belongings. His face was flushed with anger and exertion as he took in the scene. Zara surrounded by the 3 bullies, her belongings scattered across the ground, and the destroyed photograph at Ashley's feet. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" Dylan shouted, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "Leave her alone!" Dylan's arrival changed the dynamics of the confrontation, but not in the way he had hoped. Bryce turned his attention to the newcomer with obvious pleasure, recognizing an opportunity to deliver a lesson that would address both of his problems at once. "Well, well, look who decided to play hero," Bryce said with a cruel smile. "You know, Foster, I've been wondering what you see in this towel head. Is it some kind of fetish thing?" Dylan's hands clenched into fists, his entire body radiating anger at the casual cruelty of Bryce's words. "Don't talk about her like that, you piece of garbage." "Oh, he's defending his little terrorist girlfriend," Kent laughed, moving to position himself between Dylan and the group. "How sweet!" "She's not a terrorist, you ignorant moron," Dylan spat, his usual calm demeanor replaced by righteous fury. "She's probably smarter than all 3 of you combined." Ashley stepped closer to Dylan, her voice taking on a tone of false concern that was somehow more insulting than outright hostility. "Dylan, honey, I think she's got you brainwashed or something. Why don't you come with us, and we'll help you remember what real American girls are like." To emphasize her point and demonstrate her power over the situation, Ashley reached out and grabbed the edge of Zara's headscarf. The movement was deliberate and calculated, designed to humiliate and degrade in the most personal way possible. "Let's see what she's hiding under this thing," Ashley said with vicious satisfaction. "Maybe without the costume, you'll see her for what she really is." "Don't touch me," Zara said sharply, stepping back and trying to maintain her grip on the hijab that Ashley was pulling. The physical contact crossed a line that transformed the situation from verbal harassment to assault. Zara's hijab was not just a piece of clothing, but an expression of her faith, her identity, and her personal choice about modesty and privacy. Having it forcibly removed would be like being stripped naked in public, a violation that went to the core of who she was as a person. But Ashley had a firm grip on the fabric, and as Zara moved away to escape the unwanted contact, the headscarf began to slip from its carefully arranged position. Panic flooded through Zara as she realized what was about to happen. The choice about who could see her hair, a choice that was fundamental to her sense of dignity and self-determination, was being taken away from her by force. "Stop!" Dylan lunged forward to help, his protective instincts overriding any concern for his own safety, but Kent caught him with a hard shove that sent him stumbling backward into the side mirror of a parked car. The impact made a sickening crack as Dylan's head struck the glass, and he crumpled to the asphalt, dazed and bleeding from a cut on his scalp. The sight of blood running down his face and staining his shirt added a new level of seriousness to the confrontation, transforming it from harassment into genuine violence. Ashley yanked harder on the headscarf, and despite Zara's desperate attempts to hold it in place, the fabric came free in her hands. Zara's long black hair tumbled down her shoulders in waves, catching the afternoon sunlight as Ashley held the hijab up like a trophy of conquest. "There we go!" Ashley crowed with triumph, waving the stolen headscarf like a captured flag. "Look at that, she's actually got hair under there. Who would have thought?" Zara stood frozen in shock and humiliation, her hands instinctively moving to cover her exposed hair, even though the damage was already done. She felt more naked and vulnerable than if they had torn off her clothes, the violation cutting deeper than any physical assault could have reached. Around them, a few other students had stopped to watch the confrontation, some with phones out to capture her humiliation for social media distribution. The scattered crowd of witnesses made the situation even more devastating. These images and videos would follow her for the rest of her time at Roosevelt and probably beyond. Every time someone wanted to humiliate or threaten her, they would have this moment to reference, the day when she had been stripped of her dignity in front of her classmates. "Please," Zara whispered, reaching for her headscarf with trembling hands. "Give it back. Give it back," Bryce mocked, snatching the hijab from Ashley and holding it high above his head, well out of Zara's reach. His 6-foot frame gave him a significant advantage over her more modest height, and he seemed to take pleasure in using his physical size to increase her helplessness. "I don't think so," he continued with cruel satisfaction. "Maybe this will teach you to know your place." He dangled the hijab in front of her face, close enough that she could almost reach it before pulling it away again. The humiliation was carefully calculated, designed to break her spirit and establish his dominance over every aspect of the situation. "You want it? Come and get it, terrorist." Dylan had recovered enough from Kent's assault to understand what was happening, and he was advancing on Bryce with murder in his eyes. Blood continued to trickle from the cut on his scalp, creating a stark contrast against his pale skin and adding to the sense of escalating violence. "Give it back to her right now, you psychopath!" Dylan shouted, his voice carrying across the parking lot with enough force to attract attention from other areas of the school grounds. "Or what?" Kent stepped into Dylan's path, his massive frame blocking access to Bryce and the stolen hijab. "You'll what, pretty boy?" Dylan tried to push past Kent, but the larger boy easily shoved him back again with enough force to send him stumbling. This time Dylan's head hit the side mirror of the parked car with a sickening crack that echoed across the asphalt, and he crumpled to the ground like a broken doll. "Dylan!" Zara started toward him, but Ashley blocked her path with obvious satisfaction at the escalating violence. "He'll be fine," Ashley said with a nasty smile that revealed her true nature beneath the veneer of teenage popularity. "Boys will be boys, right? Maybe now he'll learn not to stick his nose where it doesn't belong." Zara looked at Dylan lying motionless on the asphalt, blood now pooling beneath his head and staining the grey surface dark red. Then she looked at her headscarf, dangling from Bryce's fingers like a captured flag, a symbol of everything that had been taken from her over the years of harassment and humiliation. The small crowd of students continued to watch and film, but no one called for help or tried to intervene. Their phones captured every moment of her degradation, but none of them seemed to consider that they were witnessing assault and theft, rather than entertaining drama. The culture at Roosevelt had trained them all to be passive consumers of other people's suffering. In that moment, Zara realized that her years of passive resistance had accomplished nothing. These bullies would continue to escalate their attacks until they seriously hurt someone she cared about, and the adults who were supposed to protect students would always be conveniently absent when it mattered most. The system that was supposed to provide safety and justice had failed her completely. The rage that had been building inside her for months, carefully controlled and channeled into academic achievement and quiet dignity, finally found its voice. "You want to see what I'm really like?" Zara said quietly, her voice deadly calm as she straightened to her full height. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, from victim to warrior, from prey to predator. "Fine, I'll show you." Something in her tone made Ashley take a step back, suddenly uncertain about the dynamics she had thought she controlled. For the first time since the confrontation began, one of the bullies seemed to recognize that they might have pushed too far. Bryce, however, was too intoxicated by his own sense of power and the adrenaline of successful domination to recognize the warning signs. He continued to wave the hijab like a trophy, his smile growing wider as he anticipated her continued helplessness. "Oh, I'm so scared," he taunted, his voice dripping with mock fear. "What are you going to do? Pray at me." Zara's response was swift and devastating, a perfect demonstration of the skills she had spent years developing under her uncle's careful guidance. Everything about her movement spoke of training and discipline. The way she shifted her weight, the angle of her stance, the controlled breathing that preceded explosive action. Years of training had taught her to read her opponent's stance and timing, to identify weaknesses and exploit them with surgical precision. Bryce was completely unprepared for what came next, his arrogance and assumptions about female helplessness leaving him vulnerable to an attack he never saw coming. She stepped forward with lightning speed, her right foot sweeping in a perfect arc that caught Bryce behind his planted leg. The technique was a classic taekwondo sweep, designed to use an opponent's own weight and momentum against them. Bryce's feet went out from under him as if the ground had suddenly disappeared, and he went down hard, his impressive height becoming a disadvantage as he had farther to fall. The hijab flew from his grasp as he hit the asphalt with a grunt of pain and surprise, his Letterman jacket providing little protection against the unforgiving surface. The sound of his body striking the ground echoed across the parking lot like a gunshot, and suddenly the small crowd of watching students was paying much closer attention to the unfolding drama. Before Bryce could react or recover his equilibrium, Zara was already moving again. Her uncle had taught her that in a real confrontation, hesitation could be fatal. Once you committed to violence, you had to follow through with decisive action that would end the threat quickly and completely. Kent, seeing his leader on the ground and his carefully planned dominance display falling apart, charged forward with a roar of anger that revealed more about his character than any amount of social posturing ever could. His massive frame powered across the asphalt like a freight train, fueled by rage and the kind of masculine pride that couldn't tolerate being challenged by someone he viewed as inferior. But Zara had been sparring against opponents twice her size since she was a child, learning to use speed and technique to overcome raw strength and aggression. Kent's impressive physical presence became a liability when it wasn't backed up by actual fighting skill or tactical awareness. She sidestepped his clumsy rush with the fluid grace of a matador avoiding a charging bull, her movements so smooth they seemed almost choreographed. As Kent thundered past her, she drove her elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision, targeting the nerve cluster that would disable him most efficiently. The strike landed perfectly, and Kent doubled over like a folding chair, gasping for air and clutching his chest as his diaphragm spasmed in response to the targeted blow. But Zara wasn't finished. Her uncle had taught her never to leave an opponent capable of continuing the fight. She followed up with a knee strike to Kent's chest that lifted him off his feet and sent him sprawling backward into the side of a parked car. The impact made a sound like thunder as 200 pounds of muscle and bone met immovable steel, and Kent slumped to the ground, wheezing and struggling to breathe. Ashley screamed and started to run, her carefully cultivated image of control and dominance evaporating in the face of actual consequences for her actions. Her high heels clicked against the asphalt as she fled toward the main building, abandoning her allies and any pretense of courage, now that the situation had turned against them. But Zara was already retrieving her hijab from where it had fallen, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins like liquid fire. She wrapped the fabric around her hair with practiced movements, restoring her dignity and reclaiming the symbol of identity that had been stolen from her. Around them, the small crowd of watching students had gone completely silent, their phones still recording, but their expressions shifted from amusement to shock. They had expected to witness another humiliation of the weird Muslim girl, but instead they had seen a masterclass in controlled violence that challenged every assumption they had made about strength and weakness. Bryce was struggling to get back to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage that had nothing to do with physical pain. His Letterman jacket was torn and dirty from his fall, and his carefully styled hair now hung in his eyes like a symbol of his diminished status. "You crazy bitch!" he snarled, spitting dirt and trying to regain some semblance of authority. "You think you can just attack me? I'll have you arrested." "For what?" Zara asked calmly, adjusting her hijab with movements that projected complete self-control. "Defending myself when you and your friends assaulted me and stole my property. Go ahead and call the police. I'm sure they'll be very interested in seeing all those videos your audience just took." She gestured to the students with their phones, and several of them quickly looked away, realizing they had inadvertently documented the bullies' crimes rather than Zara's response to them. The legal implications of what they had recorded were suddenly clear. Video evidence of theft, assault, and religious harassment that would be difficult to explain away. Kent was still wheezing against the car, holding his chest and struggling to catch his breath, while occasionally spitting blood from where he had bitten his tongue during the impact. Ashley had disappeared entirely, probably already spreading her version of events to anyone who would listen, trying to control the narrative before the truth could take hold. Bryce climbed unsteadily to his feet, his swagger replaced by something approaching respect, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. For the first time in their long history of antagonism, he was looking at Zara as a person capable of real resistance, rather than a victim to be exploited. "This isn't over," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. The threat sounded hollow, coming from someone who was still brushing dirt off his clothes and trying to restore his dignity. "Yes, it is," Zara replied firmly, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that comes from having proved oneself under pressure. "You're going to leave me alone from now on. You're going to leave Dylan alone. And if I hear about you targeting anyone else because of how they look or what they believe, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are." The promise carried weight because everyone present had just seen what she was capable of when pushed too far. The girl they had dismissed as weak and helpless had demonstrated skills that most of them couldn't imagine possessing, and the implications were still sinking in. She moved to where Dylan was beginning to sit up against the car, gingerly touching the cut on his head and blinking in amazement as he processed what he had just witnessed. Blood had stopped flowing from the wound, but his shirt was stained dark red, and he looked pale from blood loss and shock. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern as she knelt beside him on the asphalt. "I think so," Dylan replied, his voice slightly weak, but gaining strength as he focused on her face. That was incredible. Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Long story," Zara said, helping him to his feet with careful attention to his potential injuries. "Let me drive you to the nurse. That cut needs to be looked at." As they walked away from the scene of the confrontation, leaving Bryce and Kent to deal with their injuries and damaged pride, Zara could hear them arguing in low, angry voices about what had just happened. But their recriminations and blame-shifting felt like background noise now, irrelevant to her sense of finally having reclaimed her power and dignity. For the first time in 3 years at Roosevelt High School, Zara felt like herself again, not a victim hiding in the shadows, but a strong young woman who refused to be intimidated or diminished by others' hatred and ignorance. The quiet girl who had tried to make herself invisible had found her voice, and it spoke with the authority of someone who would never be silent again.